Hey everybody, it's Shaman Sister Sin, and you're listening to the Meditations and More podcast brought to you by littleshaman.org. That's me, Little Shaman. Today I wanted to talk to you about psychopaths. A lot of people have questions about them, so I thought we could talk about it on the show today. Psychopaths are interesting to many people. We often find them so intriguing, so alien. How can someone just not care? How can someone have no conscience? Their more violent exploits have been the subject of movies and documentaries. Serial killers in particular are of huge interest to people. How does somebody become that way? I myself have studied serial killers for over 2 decades. The thing is, not all psychopaths are rapists and murderers. There are many who never commit a crime. So what about the everyday psychopaths? What about the ones that are not serial killers, who are not on the news? Are they still just as dangerous? The answer is yes. When you have a person who has no conscience, whose only goal is fulfillment, who does not see other people as humans with feelings and rights, you have a dangerous person. This is a person who thinks nothing of destroying the lives of others if that's what it takes to get what they want, and maybe even for fun. Psychopaths are end-stage narcissists. They are what you end up with when it is not possible to be any more narcissistic. They are what happens when the focus on the self is so large and all-consuming that there's no room for anything else. The same goes for sociopaths. There are many people who will argue that there are differences between psychopaths and sociopaths, but the truth is, it's like arguing the difference between eggshell and off-white. Neither one of those things is a clinical term or a diagnosis anyway, so for the purposes of this podcast, I'm talking about both. Because psychopaths are end-stage narcissists, all psychopaths are narcissists, but not all narcissists are psychopaths. So what does this mean? It means that narcissism is a spectrum. So there are varying degrees of narcissistic people. The closer a person is to the end of the spectrum, the more rigid and inflexible, the worse, in other words, their narcissistic behaviors are going to be. Pathological narcissism is the core of psychopathy. There are no psychopaths who are not pathologically narcissistic. Now, everybody has some narcissistic traits or tendencies to a certain degree. We are human beings, and most of these behaviors or traits are self-defensive. However, not everyone is pathologically narcissistic, and there comes a point in the spectrum where narcissism overwhelms or replaces rational thinking and behavior. That is where it becomes pathological, when a person is unable to change their thinking or change their behavior, even in the face of proof that they're wrong or in the face of total failure. These people are often paranoid and can even appear delusional because of their magical thinking, grandiosity, and because of their inability to temper feelings with facts. As the spectrum continues, these things generally get worse and worse. This often results in narcissists being misdiagnosed with things like multiple personality disorder or schizophrenia and other psychotic disorders because their ability to function is so low and their relationship with reality seems to be so impaired. The closer they get to the end of the spectrum, though, something seems to happen that changes that. Narcissists have the difficulties they have in large part due to their emotionality. Like small children, they operate off of emotions rather than facts. This is why so much of their behavior seems illogical, because it is. Behavior based on emotions is often irrational or illogical. Narcissistic people exist outside the ego structure. It is a dysfunctional part of them, and their constant conflicts with these things are a huge source of their problems. Ego is part of being human. We all have one. It's the thing that speaks as I when we talk and when we think. It is the thing that makes sure we don't get treated badly, so it's very necessary. However, when it malfunctions, the results can be ugly. The ego structure of a pathologically narcissistic person tortures them continuously, screaming, "What about me?" endlessly. Then the superego jumps in and says, "What about you? You're stupid, you're worthless, you're ugly, you're wrong." The ego then cranks into overdrive, screaming, "No, I'm not. Everybody else is. Look at all these people who are much worse than me. I'm not worthless. I'm the most important thing." And on and on and on, these two things battle it out in the narcissistic person's head. The narcissist simply exists, day in and day out, trying to survive this endless war and escape it whenever they can, usually through projection, blame shifting, gaslighting, future faking, magical thinking, and other forms of abuse or manipulation. The psychopath does not have these problems. As one clinician or another stated, when one gazes upon the psychopath, there is less there than meets the eye. We could say that the superego is essentially missing from their personality structure. There's a theory that most people have personality structure which includes three parts: the id, the ego, and the superego. Following this model, the true psychopath's personality structure appears to be dyadic. That means it only has two parts, not three. This is because they're less developed than other types of narcissistic people. The superego forms between the ages of 3 and 5. Psychopaths appear to experience an interruption or a deviation in emotional development before then. For example, psychopaths don't engage in repression because this type of defense mechanism is too mature for them. Their emotional range is even less than that of toddlers. The feelings they do have don't require other people to be seen as human beings or as individuals. These feelings usually come quickly and they leave quickly as well. Unable to feel the more broad, complex emotions such as anger, guilt, depression, sympathy, jealousy, gratitude, empathy, remorse, sadness, loneliness, and reciprocal joy, the psychopath's emotional repertoire is limited more to the feeling types of primitive emotions: excitement, frustration, rage, boredom, envy, dysphoria, and shame. As with all pathologically narcissistic people, their emotional lives center on managing envy and shame. And as with many other narcissists, this is usually achieved by destroying the object they're envious of or that they may experience humiliation from. The farther down a narcissist is on the spectrum towards psychopathy, the fewer emotions they actually have. This makes sense when comparing the calculated predatory behavior of many psychopaths with the emotional reactivity of non-psychopathic narcissists. However, if there's a difference regarding the superego, the ego of a psychopath is just as grandiose, self-focused, and dysfunctional as any other pathologically narcissistic person, probably even more so, actually. Without the superego running interference, the inner landscape of the psychopath is different than that of other narcissists. It's as if, rather than existing outside of the ego and in conflict with the ego, as most narcissists do, the psychopath exists inside the ego and experiences no conflicts in this area at all. They're not worried about being seen as a bad person. They don't care if their behavior is perceived negatively by others or if it hurts anybody. It just doesn't matter. This is one of the key differences in psychopaths and other types of narcissists. Narcissists fear exposure, rejection, abandonment. They react defensively, even if it doesn't appear to be defensive. Psychopaths don't fear these things. They act offensively from a position of predation and dominance. One of the biggest functions of the superego is what we call our conscience. This is the thing that speaks up in your mind and says, you shouldn't say that, you're going to hurt somebody's feelings. Or you shouldn't take things that don't belong to you. Non-psychopathic narcissists generally do have a superego, which is to say at one time, they at least had the possibility of a conscience. It is maladaptive and dysfunctional, and usually behaves as a persecutory assailant rather than as a moral compass, but the beginnings of it or the possibility of it was there at one time. What actually happens is, unfortunately, is that narcissistic people often have too active of a conscience when it comes to themselves, and this dysfunctional, self-focused conscience attacks and abuses them nonstop. Psychopaths have no superego to speak of, therefore they have no conscience at all, dysfunctional or otherwise. They exist in the instinctual pleasure principle of the primitive infantile mind, which is supported by the grandiose, unchecked, and dysfunctional ego. The moderator of these two things that most of us have, the superego, is just not there. The emotional and functional handicaps, which hold many pathologically narcissistic people back, are not a problem for them either. This is why self-sabotage is generally uncommon among true psychopaths. Narcissists sabotage themselves many times because on some level they don't believe they deserve it, or because they're so reactive to their own emotions that their behavior ruins things for them. They can't get out of their own way. Psychopaths do not feel that way, and they don't have that problem. They are a lot more difficult to see through than other types of narcissists, exactly because of that. Psychopaths are able to mimic normal human behavior much better than other types of narcissists. Because narcissism is a spectrum, there are many people who are pathologically narcissistic and have psychopathic tendencies, though they are not true psychopaths. It's hard to say why some people become psychopaths and others don't. It may have to do with the level of trauma or abuse that a person has endured. It might have to do with when in this person's life these things happened. It might have to do with genetics or a predisposition to this type of thing. It could have to do with the uterine environment and fetal development. It's really hard to say. Some say psychopaths are born, others say they are created. There's no definitive answers right now, and there may never be. It's probably both things conspiring in a perfect storm, just like most other things. In the end, though, it doesn't really matter because what matters is protecting yourself from this type of person. And you do that through educating yourselves about them. I hope this clears a few things up for you. As always, I look forward to your comments, questions, and suggestions, so please keep those coming. I take appointments online, over the phone, via email, and through text and messenger. So if you're interested in speaking with me one-on-one, you can visit littleshaman.org and click the book and appointment tab to go ahead and do that. I give workshops once a month, and I am giving them throughout the remainder of 2019. So if you're interested in attending one of them, you can visit littleshaman.org and click the workshops tab to go ahead and sign up for that. You've been listening to the Meditations and More podcast brought to you by littleshaman.org. That's me, the Little Shaman. May the Great Spirit bless you and have a wonderful day.